Right, I'll introduce Richard Osgood, who's going to be talking to us this evening about the Operation Nightingale project that he's led, or he's leading, it's still going on, digging Band of Brothers. Richard, I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. And I should start really by saying happy Thanksgiving. Given we got an American theme tonight, one of the reasons why David wasn't able to recruit any American delegates perhaps to coming on and listening to the talk is that they're all tucking down to a turkey dinner perhaps at some point soon. Anyway, we're talking about Band of Brothers, and unless you've hidden under a rock or something and have no interest in the Second World War, you will have heard of this unit because they are probably the most famous celebrated unit of the Second World War from the Western Allied point of view. They are 6th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles. In particular, we're looking at Easy Company, and they are that famous in part because of the television series based around the book by Stephen Ambrose called Band of Brothers, about this particular unit that fight through from D-Day right until the end of the war on the European theatre. Lots and lots written about them. Books by individual soldiers themselves. There are lovely walks you can do. You can download. You can see a couple of leaflets there about Littlecote and the museums. You can download those online. Walk around Ramsbury and places like that. So a very well-known unit. I was trying to think of a British equivalent that was as famous as Easy Company from the Second World War, and I really struggled to think of one. I think the only equivalent I could get anywhere close to would be 617 Squadron, which was the Dam Busters. But even that, I don't know whether it's quite got the individual knowledge that Easy Company have. I mean, you can probably name the odd person out of 617, but nowhere near as many of this lot. So that's a very celebrated unit. Well known for its actions in particular on D-Day, but perhaps less well known is that they spent a fair proportion of their time in Wiltshire. And from my perspective, one of the things that I'm really keen on with the program we've been running within the Ministry of Defence called Operation Nightingale is to engage as many of our military veterans with archaeological programs that interest them and speak to their tribal narrative of their history that they can bring their own knowledge to. And of course, knowledge of a Second World War unit would be just perfectly up that street. So if you go to the quite gorgeous village of Aldbourne, you can't fail to be impressed and think how engaging a program this would be for a bunch of military veterans that are very keen on engaging in archaeology as part of their recovery program. And you can see the blue plaque on the side of the pub there on the side of the Crown. So really rather special project potentially. Normally with these archaeological projects, you put up a map of where it is. Well, Aldbourne, not far from Marlborough, not far from Swindon, but I like this one in particular for a map because this shows the sheer American presence all around that part of Wiltshire, with Chiseldon up to the north. Aldbourne you can see featuring very prominently. Let me see if I can get my pointer. Maybe not. The site here, Aldbourne, which we're going to be talking about, but then you've got Ramsbury, another site of the Parachute Infantry Regiment, Chiltern Folliot, the Parachute School, and you can imagine for the British people that lived there, it must have been quite extraordinary that you're inundated with thousands of American service personnel in 1943 in preparation for D-Day. So our mission, excuse me if I use images from the TV show, because if you've not seen it, it is a fantastic piece of television. It's lasted incredibly well. Our mission, I felt, wouldn't it be great if we could just find one of these huts that Easy Company lived in just before they embarked for D-Day, because this was their last piece of sanity and quiet and peace before the maelstrom of Normandy. And these are the individuals that dropped in on the evening and morning of D-Day, so 5th, 6th of June, in advance of the landings at Utah Beach in particular, which is where they were to support, but also things like Omaha Beach. So could we find any traces of them? Although local legend has it that it had been looked at before and it'd been leveled for the sports pitches, so unlikely maybe to find too much. How was I going to do this? Well, clearly by assembling a crack team of archaeologists. we were really fortunate with this whole program. We got some wonderful veterans with us, mixed with some really good archaeologists, and with the support of just such a helpful and lovely village that it made for a perfect atmosphere, which was half of the project. Archaeology for me, it's all about people. I always say this, it's about people, and that's the participants as well as the people you're looking at in the past. To make a good project, you need all of the elements to combine: good finds, good company, beautiful venue, and nice participants. And we were really fortunate that we had a perfect storm and put it all together. As I said, if you've not been to Aldbourne, you really must go, because it is a quintessentially beautiful English village. This is the inside of the church with one of the most wonderful collection of Tudor monuments I've seen. Really very, very special. And it must have been quite astonishing for those American servicemen, many of whom may well not have left their state, to suddenly be transported back in time hundreds of years to a medieval format English village. And for them, it was an affecting experience. They, for the most part, write very warmly about their experiences in Aldbourne. Here is a wedding of one of the members of Easy Company superimposed on the church today, but it's a formative part of their experience as a military unit. Now, one of the sites we thought we'd really try to look for was the hut used by the sergeants of Easy Company, and they play a prominent role in the book about the unit, about the TV series, and naturally enough, the NCOs tend to run the military units. For those with any military experience, you know how important your senior NCOs are, the non-commissioned officers are, in running a successful military unit. So these are the people that keep them all together under fire. And we thought we'd try and trace the housing utilised by this guy, the real individual on the right, his portrayal in the TV on the left. It's a chap called Carwood Lipton. And the reason we wanted to find, in particular, Carwood Lipton is because there exists this rather splendid photograph of Aldbourne from the war years with various huts. You can see a nice Nissen hut here. Also potentially a Quonset hut, where we're still debating the differences between the Quonset and the Nissen hut. This is, we think, a Nissen hut. This is the sergeant's accommodation. You've got a crate here that the gliders that they were going to go into Normandy with was shipped over with, then used for storage and accommodation. But the really lovely thing is you've got this hillside with the trees on it, and you can still equate your views today with that wartime view. So that's a really important thing to be able to make use of. Okay, so that's a better view. So there you've got the trees that we're going to look at. So Carwood Lipton is this man here in front of the military unit. Therefore, it's a really nice thing. You could put your archaeological dig team in front of the location where the trees and the hills in the right background, and get that feel for 1943 and 1944. It may not be traditional archaeology looking at Second World War stuff, because there's a lot written about it. You've seen films of this unit, but you still do the same archaeological techniques when you're putting together a project. So that would involve all your usual desktop and remote sensing and remote surveying elements to it. We've got a really good collection of photographs, both from when it was used by the Americans and also by the British predecessors, because this hut camp had already been put together for amongst other units, artillery and British armoured units, before the Americans moved in. So in 1943, this camp had been used already by the British. So you've got some great images of the huts around the sports pitches of Aldbourne. This one here is rather lovely because you can still see the camouflage on the roof and a series of British military trucks going up the lane. And this resource is available in the Historic England Archives in Swindon, and they're a really wonderful receptacle for images from the time period. It gives you a really good pointer. What was intriguing for us is this particular building, and this will become apparent later. So you've got a lovely image of this hut next to the long one, and you can get oblique images of it having been moved. This long one, this is now in a chap called Stephen Sowerby, a really nice guy who lives in the village and works on these incredible vintage cars, but he's had this hut moved, and that's one of the few surviving buildings from the military camp that still exists in Aldbourne today. And from the archive work that people like Dan have done, we're able to get together little bits of information about the camp, although not 100% accurate. These sketch maps have proved really, really useful. This is the camp that we wanted to look at from the British perspective before the Americans move in, when it was used by the 34th Armoured Tank Brigade from the Royal Armoured Service Corps. So you've got all these little huts up and down the lane in the sports pitches. So not a wildly accurate picture, but nonetheless it's telling you all about where little bits and pieces took place and where elements were located. So this one says it talked about where dumping areas for petrol took place. It's somewhere we really not necessarily wanted to excavate. Even more useful to us was this American one, and this was done from memory by one of the members of the American Armed Forces that came over here. It gave us some really intriguing pointers. I think the thing that everybody really wanted to find was this part to the left, the area dump. Now, a rubbish pit may not seem particularly appealing, but you can just imagine the sort of 20th century treasure you might get in there. Rusty, admittedly, but some very interesting artifacts relating to the wartime years. The thing you don't want to be finding is something marked HB, the honey bucket. Honey bucket is, of course, a euphemism. That's latrines, and for the best one in the world, a Roman latrine with lots of interesting environmental data is one thing. A 20th century military latrine, I would advise people probably want to keep away from those things. Well, the building I showed you earlier with the camouflaged roof is this one here. And this is the one we were particularly keen on because it says E.S. And remember, this is just a schematic illustration, but it gives you a rough idea, an approximation of where the building might be located, and indeed what it functioned as, because that down as E Company Sergeant's Barracks. So this is the accommodation building used by Garwood-Lipton and his colleagues, the sergeants, in that photograph you saw earlier. So this was something that would be a really lovely building to find. Going to Google Earth, as I guess lots of people do these days, this is the sports pitches today. I believe the football team is sadly no longer going. I just love the idea of watching Aldbourne United or whatever they were called. There are still legacies of the floodlights there, and this is the area where all those huts were. So you've got one surviving building from the war years is here, just by the top right of the image, and the goal line more or less marks out the position with a lot of the hut buildings. So our job was really to see if there was any chance of finding anything still there. So the air photographs from the war years, you could co-locate on top of those. And here you are. This is a really lovely 1940s air photograph. One of the great things of when you've got American camps in Britain is that they made use of it as a training location for the Air Force and the Army Air Force, in that they flew over these areas and practiced their air photography skills. So the American air bases, military army bases, are usually pretty well covered by photographs from the war years, and Aldbourne is no exception. Ramsbury's the same. This is the camouflaged roof. It's no longer so camouflaged here, but really good picture of the roof of the sergeant's building. So with the road scheme being more or less as it is, we could hope to co-locate on top of it. And if you go around Aldbourne today, you do still see the odd structure that survives. This is the interior of Stephen's building that he now uses to help renovate cars. What we were keen on doing is looking at the way that this was constructed and seeing all the fixtures and fittings, because although we didn't expect to find a huge amount related to the American camp, we thought there was the possibility that there would be some structural components left that had been left in the ground when the rest of the camp had been bulldozed and moved away, and we'd be able to relate what still existed with what was in the ground. So that was a good thing for our photographer, Harvey Mills, to catalogue. And throughout the presentation, the photographs I'm largely using were taken by Harvey, and it was a real privilege that we've got such a top photographer taking our images. Here's another of the surviving buildings. It's just on the edge of the sports pitches. I think I'm right in saying, I could be corrected by Dan if not, but I think this is the cookhouse, one of the few remaining structures used by both the British and the Americans in the 1940s and still survives today. And it's a really incongruous building, isn't it? You can imagine going past this and not being impressed by it at all until you tell people that, well, maybe Easy Company, the band of brothers, used this building, and then it changes on changes completely. It's like a lot of artifactual association. It's the people that are associated with the particular buildings and items that make them in many ways so special. And another one which I really like is this building. It's just the village hall. A really splendid building with a very fancy floor. The floor we know was replaced after the war because the Americans danced so many times in there with local individuals that the floor wore out, and they paid for it to be replaced at the end of the war. And it was also a lovely venue for our archaeology team to go and watch the TV series Band of Brothers in the village where a lot of it took place in the early episodes. So that was a really special thing. So having had a look at the air photographs and whatever documentary sources we could get hold of, as you just seen, next phase was to call upon Wiltshire archaeology stalwart Dave Sabin to use his cart array for his Fluxgate magnetometer survey to move up and down the spore pits, just to see how much, if anything, was left of the hut camp after it had been levelled and tidied away to form this rather splendid football pitch. And the answer was actually a surprising amount of heritage was still visible. Some of it is very noisy, as they talk about in geophysics speak. This is a pipe trench that has this bipolar set of anomalies, these very large magnetic readings running across the pitch. The big white blob at the very top is a football goalpost that you saw in the survey. Really no point in doing any work there because in terms of geophysical survey, because the metal around it is just so noisy, as they call it. But there are some intriguing elements. These dark lines, what are these? And these look like pathways or something like that. Particularly exciting with these little lines, which were just exactly in the right places for the huts of the war years. But of course, the site we were particularly interested in is that of the Sergeant's building of Carwood Lipton, and that was right at the very top of our survey. And you can see all these little black and white dots right to the top. Hopefully you can see there, which is why the red box is around it, because that is our excavation trench. That's the first one we put in. Then we put a little test pit in. I say we put a little test pit in. I'm afraid that was Dan. He was itching for us to put a test pit in just to see, and he was right. I have to say he was right, to see what this anomaly was, what it related to, so we could ground truth, as they call it, the geophysical survey results, and see what was left in the ground. So main trench was the one at the top, to have a look at the various very strong metallic signals, and then we put the test pit in to see what the darker linear anomaly was. And all of the work was done by hand. I say all of it. On the very last day, Joe, bless her, was managed to persuade a local farmer to help us backfill with a digger, or I think we'd probably still be there today filling it by hand. So that was a very good piece of morale. So the guys here, you can see they are deturfing one of the sites. We did that for not only the excavation area, but where we also did an exercise in metal detecting to see if there were any spikes that were worth investigating, and mapping all of those that came out of the ground. So here, two of our veterans looking at a particular signal, both called Paul here, so as an ex-infantry and ex-artilleryman, looking at the ground to see what was there. And we all camped on site, some in fancier accommodation than others. You can see Paul's Land Rover with his cot bed next to it, so he lived in luxury. Great thing is morale, is working in the open air, using your mind, using your body, and chatting away, and the weather was just wonderful. So we managed to tick most of the boxes from a welfare and a well-being point of view, as well as doing some very interesting archaeology. So here I've only put this slide in because it sort of makes out that I did any work on that dig at all, holding the wheelbarrow for two of our veterans to dig away. You can also see the depth of the topsoil there. It's all dug down by hand in that very neat section, partly because this is an area where the bulldozer had, when they'd leveled the pitch, had pushed a lot of the soil up into one corner directly over the site we were meant to be looking at. So it's protectively covered what was left in the ground, but at the same time there was an awful lot of soil to shift. And you saw in that geophysical survey those little spikes, those little dots, excuse me, in the area that we wanted to look at, the hut camp of Carwood Lipton. And each one of those little dots related to one of these things. These are concrete post pads for the hut to sit upon, and they've all got a iron spike which helps the metallic reading be very clear on the survey, and they demarcated the area of the Nissan hut, and they've also got this black material stretched upon them, and this is a sort of tar paper which assists the waterproofing of the individual structure. With the assistance of a cherry picker that came down to help the project, you can see those particular pads giving you the dimensions of the building. So we've got the complete extent north-south and also east-west of the building. We didn't bother digging this out. You could, but it'll be a repeat of what's over the rest of it. And the tar paper of waterproofing is picked out here. So you've got a really nice structural component over which you can fit your wireframe model of this hut that you saw in the photograph and make it out. This is exactly where that structure sat. So we'd located it precisely. So even though the area had been leveled and had been demolished at the end of the well, just post-war, there was still a lot left in the ground. So this is something that's we're really lucky that there's a lot of overburden from soil, because this really is worth preserving. This is a building used by one of the most famous military units of the war, and you put it in the corner of the sports pitches at Aldbourne, a really valuable piece of archaeology. And that it looks so neat, I think, because it was done very, very well, excavated by hand. I'm going to call this Dan's test pit. This is Dan's test pit. This is over the linear anomaly, and it really was worth doing because you can hopefully make out on the colours here, so much more orange colour here, and it gave a very large metallic reading because we think it's covered in a clinker and it formed a path. It's basically a sort of slag material forming a path going up towards the buildings. So you've got one small test pit has given you a lot of information that how the paths were constructed going up into the various huts that we wanted to investigate, and it was done for good reason, because the winter weather that they were facing, much like we're getting at the moment, was cold and wet, and if you didn't have the paths in place, you were faced with a quagmire. So they dug these paths to their huts, and here's one here, which then filled with this clinker material, made it a much more manageable situation when you've got hundreds of people moving around at a sports pitch. A lovely element of this project was not simply digging the hut, was to welcome everybody who lived locally and just seemed so keen. So we had the local Cubs, we had his John escorting the local children who asked wonderful questions. We actually revealed one a very intelligent young lad who came to site every day, every morning, just to quiz us to see what we found the night before, and it was a lovely experience to have the whole community keen on our experience, and we were able to show them all the finds on open days that we'd selected on the Saturday at the end of the excavation, so they could see just how much we had or hadn't found. We were visited by Ethel in the bottom right, who was one of the residents who remembered the Americans being in the village, and we also had Cecil, who was a British Normandy veteran who was in the British armour that went over on D-Day, and he'd previously met members of Easy Company. And it's not like normal archaeology when you've got eyewitnesses that can come and tell you about their experiences, and that's a really valuable thing, that you can record that social history part of the project as well. Now, did we find anything? That's the key thing for this. It's nice to get a little bit of structure, but did we get any material culture relating to the use of the huts by the soldiers, and indeed by other people as well? And the answer is yes. We got a colossal amount, and this is Harvey's rather lovely montage of finds that we made. So I'm going to go through just some of them so you can see. I think one of the things that I liked the best was this that was in the topsoil over it, because it was all sorts of crisp packets and sweet wrappers and the frazzles, all these sorts of things, big D peanuts I can see there. Some of these were even pre-decimalization, and it was a great thing for the school children that came to the site that you could demonstrate how long plastic stays in the ground. And this is a time when that was one of the main things being talked about in terms of environmentalism, was how plastic survives. We were able to demonstrate just what a material this is. So that was the topmost part of the palimpsest, but nonetheless something that normally you would discard very quickly on an archaeological dig. But I thought it was a really good entree into telling the children about the archaeology of Aldbourne. Another thing which I thought resonated really well was the fact that these buildings were used after the military had left in the mid 1940s by groups called squatters, and these are people whose buildings had been bombed out, let's say, in some of the big cities, and they were living in the remains of the military camp prior to them getting council accommodation. And you could get little traces of this very human life, things like the marbles on the left, toy vehicles. I mean, these are slightly later than the squatting usage of the site, but you've got quite a few toy cars. You like to think of the children, the squatters, using this house outside, and just before they were given housing elsewhere. This one was nice because it's a military vehicle. There were also lots of pots and pans from its usage in squatting time, and this was on top of something like an oven or a brazier, which would have it did have a saucepan on top of it when it was just left in the ground at the end of the usage of the building and its demolition. So a really nice social history to go with the military usage, and that's something that I think I'm very keen that we have, is not just the military use of this site, it's the whole use of this part of Aldbourne. But of course, we were there to look for easy company, and what are you looking for with parachutists? What would be the best things you could possibly find? Well, I would venture to suggest a piece of parachute. We had quite a bit of this material. I'm not to mention, I don't think that Janine found quite a bit of this stuff, but yeah, parachute silk. This is we worked at this from a reserve parachute, so this is about as good as it's going to get, maybe, with looking for paratroopers. You've got a bit of parachute material stuffed down the side of one of the buildings. We did get other bits of American ephemera and militaria. These are Garand clips. They're from the Garand rifle. I'm allowed to call them clips, not charges. Charges is the British example. And there's what it should like, a complete intact one. And we had quite a few of these that were found inside the buildings. Presumably they'd used them on the training exercises, and they'd either fallen out of the kit bags or been cast away after their local training. Brylcreem bottle found by Kaylee. This is really lovely as well, because this is all part of trying to stay human in their training regime, perhaps going to meet local girls and going to the dance hall afterwards, and putting a bit of Brylcreem in your hair is one of those things that maintains your dignity and humanity in these training scenarios. And then curios. The central one, many of you probably recognize. These little keys that go for tins of spam. Military rations aren't always famed for being of their highest quality and being hugely palatable. Spam, a bit like corned beef, I think. Some people love it, some people loathe it, but there were lots of spam tin keys that we found on this site. Another element that shows that a bored soldier is a very dangerous thing. We found this threepenny bit with a bullet hole right in the middle of it, and we put this bullet into it just to show you that it's a perfect fit. This is a Garand American bullet that fits perfectly right through the king's head. I don't believe any sniper's that good, and we're pretty certain from all the military people we spoke to that they just put that coin straight on top of the rifle and then fired it. Foolhardy perhaps, but something that bored individuals may do. Another element of Americana found by Carlos is this Pepsi Cola bottle. So we were wondering whether that'd be a good sponsorship opportunity in later years, to know that Easy Company was sitting in their hut relaxing, drinking Pepsi. But it's a nice American sign, we thought, as is this one. We'll never know who this individual soldier did support, but it's a little sports button, little badge that says "I support," with a basketball underneath. Whether or not it was the Chicago Bulls or whoever, we just never know. But it's a very, very human thing. And it wouldn't be the same without showing Paul's star find. This is a handle of a parachute. It's the reserve chute pull. It's got some of the red paint over here that survives on it. It's been used. So why is it in the hut? And I think everybody on the excavation had a theory, and it ranged from it being accidentally pulled in the hut and they hid it to hide the evidence of a misdemeanor, through to this was actually pulled in emergency on D-Day. You pulled your reserve chute, and this is the thing that saved your life, because if this thing doesn't function, you empirically you are going to die, because your parachutes have both failed, because this is the reserve chute. And wouldn't it be nice to think this is one that was used on the morning of D-Day, and therefore a very precious souvenir coming back to the hut? And the answer is we'll never know. We do know that it is an American reserve parachute pull, so it is a really splendid item, lovely artifact to link to the American troops at Aldbourne. Now, wider than looking at the sports pitch on its own in isolation, we were all really keen on the project to go out into the landscape and see where they trained. One of the reasons that the Americans were there was because there was a campsite already there. It's on the edges of the Salisbury Plain training area, where we know lots of Easy Company trained at a place called Beech's Barn, and you can still find American ammunition up there on the Salisbury Plain training area today. But they must have done a lot of their training, what we call backdoor training today. They would sit there on their camp and be put on route marches and practice some of the rudimentary elements of fighting in woods, patrolling, before they went to the jump school, the parachute school at Chiltern Folliot in the nearby airfield. So they've got everything they need here. Well, Dan took a team up into the woods, Pensacola Woods and nearby, just to try and see if there were any elements of possible American usage. And the answer is that there was indeed. Very difficult to see, and even more difficult to portray on slideshows over the internet. You can perhaps make out little foxholes in the wood. Now, these are exercises in not just digging and practicing that physical side of things, but it's practicing also how you defend wood lines and how you fight in woods as well. And that's something that was going to prove very valuable as a lesson when they went to the Ardennes later on. And there are bits of American militaria around these particular positions. Further traces around here are these rather wonderful things called, known now as arbor-glyphs. These are tree carvings, something that I think many of us have known over the years, that humans will always leave their mark on the landscape, often their names in graffiti whenever they can. If you look in many a church, you'll find things carved in there from long ago. But the military are also exponents of this art. I know in Fildeen Church is full of Australian graffiti, and every tree block on training areas you'll find these things carved. Soldiers will always carve their names. You just have to think of going up to Maze Howe up in Orkney. You'll see Viking runic graffiti, or the font at Burford has got Anthony Sedley, prisoner 1649, scratched into the lead of this font. And trees are no exception. It's something that beech trees work particularly well with, because they've got nice smooth bark. And in the woods around Aldbourne, you will see little traces of carvings left behind by, we think, American troops. Some are better than others, some are more legible than others. This one seems to say Samarin J43. This is a nice one. This is a model that's now on the internet. So the reference on the right, basically, if you go into a digital platform called Sketchfab and you type in Aldbourne tree carving into the search, you'll get this model that Harvey put together. And you can see, again, it's a beech tree, and you can rotate this thing around on the internet. But it says Tony G 43. What a wonderful little moniker. And we are wondering whether it might possibly be Tony Garcia, which is one of the big characters of Easy Company, who was there in 1943. It's a possible, we'll never know, but it's a nice thought. Even nicer thought is this one. Difficult in some ways to make out, but you got CL SC USA. Do you remember we were looking for Carwood Lipton CL? Well, he was from South Carolina, SC, and then USA. Now, again, we'll never know, but isn't that tempting to think that this particular soldier that we'd been looking at, trying to locate his house from the duration of the project, that this might just be a little bit of misdemeanor that he's left behind on a tree in Aldbourne, and it's been there for the best part of 80 years. It's a nice thought. Whether it's true or not, I don't think, again, we'll ever tell. The other element we were really lucky with is that all the welcoming nature of people who wanted to help the project, and we were able to see so many elements of Easy Company's life as we visited. You've got this the real privilege that we had of having a Dakota, one of the aircraft that many of the paratroopers jumped from on the morning of D-Day, flew over the site while we were there. You can see it in the D-Day stripes and the American star. And then going to Littlecote House, and this is the headquarters company for the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, was based at this location. Again, going back to this idea of some Americans who may not have left their state suddenly being faced with this just astonishing manor house with the beautiful 17th century collections of the Alexander Popham cavalry armor, and you can just see the tables and the benches in which they sat and ate in the evenings. It's a real privilege, and if you haven't been there, there are still little traces of Easy Company's presence when you go. The square around the church in Aldbourne used to have these stable blocks. There's a little quote here from one of the members of the 506 from Easy Company, and he said, "I lived in many places in the army, in 40 and 8 boxes, in tards and wooden barracks, in barns, ditches, holes, hotels, hospitals, cellars, nissen huts, shattered houses, and German chalets, schools, offices, and apartments, but none was quite as enjoyable as those box stalls in Aldbourne." And that's because many of the soldiers, when they first arrived in Aldbourne, were put up in these particular huts, and one of them has now gone over, been shipped over, thanks to some of the people of Aldbourne, over to the United States, where it's forming part of a museum about the paratroopers. And the other one that has been moved by the church is now at Littlecote House itself. Indeed, it's such a special occasion that when one of the American soldiers, they disembarked over in Liverpool when they arrived in England in 1943 and came down at night time to Aldbourne. When they woke up in the morning, this chap said he thought he'd woken up on a Hollywood set. It was so bucolic and quintessentially English. It was quite an astonishing location. So if you get a chance to go to Littlecote, you see little hut used by Easy Company, and there is also a really good little museum in the house itself, in the hotel, which is now a hotel, but you can go in and have a look at Museum of the Screaming Eagles with a lot of little bits about their lives over in Wiltshire. Now, we did also take this material to Digging for Britain, to put on Alice Roberts' table. This is put on there very, very shortly after she'd had a collection of Iron Age treasure. So hence the face of, I paraphrase, "Why are you putting this rusty material on my table?" You can see it's our parachute pull and the broken bottle, but she's put on that deliberately because for her, again, it was a very interesting story that we were able to tie together quite nicely. And that program also drew in some splendid stories from the public that watched it. This is an adult man, an old man now, who was a little boy in the village at the time of Easy Company, and he lived with a man on the edges of the sports pitches, and he was almost adopted by the members of Easy Company as a little boy, and he had a toy monkey called Switzy. Here's Switzy in his little hat, and the Americans donated some of their patches and badges to him to put on the monkey's top. So you've got Screaming Eagle, the 101st's very famous logo, and the airborne patch, and it's still on the monkey to this day. And the man that he was living with actually was killed at the Battle of Arnhem, which is another battle that Easy Company, he was a British soldier, but he dies at the Battle of Arnhem, which is something else that Easy Company was involved in. So it was quite a curiosity that his relative was killed at a battle that Easy Company was also fighting in, and he's kept the monkey to this day, and that was prompted purely by seeing it on the television. From our point of view, the morale of participants was all important, and the weather was gorgeous. We were able to camp on this football pitch, and you can see it makes for a great morale of what the military call watching Hexy TV, Hexy burner television. You can sit and just stare at a fire and tell your stories, and maybe take part in the pub quiz in the local village, and luckily not win, because if we'd won, we would never have got any more cakes from the WI next day. So it was a good political move not to win it. Not that we would have done anyway, but it was a close run thing. We were also visited by local reenactors, and it just seems to be a place where people do come if they've got an interest in the 101st Airborne, and in particular this military unit of such renown, the Easy Company, and people even want to reenact them. I don't know whether these lot ever jump out of aeroplanes to do the full reenactment, but nonetheless they dress up in the particular period costumes and the period Littlecote, and for them to come and see an excavated hut of one of the people that they are very keen on was a very unusual and very worthwhile experience. We're also very lucky that we could watch the TV series in the huts, or next to the huts, used by Easy Company. So we've talked about Carwood Lipton, but we were joined by one of the actors, Tim, here. So we were able to watch him being killed in the Ardennes forest whilst he joined our dig team, and that was a curious experience. And the project has been all about really not just improving the lives of modern military service personnel, but remembering those that took part in those heady days of the morning of 6th of June 1944. And these are You can see the quite gnarly individuals of Easy Company. This is where they've just captured Saint-Marie du Mont, which is very close to Utah Beach. This is the early morning of the early days of D-Day, so they've captured one of the German positions before the Allies move on. All archaeology should have a dig T-shirt. We were fortunate enough to have Harvey design ours. The Ace of Spades is the design used by Easy Company. So our dig T-shirt, you may have seen some of the pictures, people wearing black T-shirts with this Ace of Spades design. Well, that is the logo used by the Band of Brothers, and you can see it all over the place. 506. This is the Ramsbury Brewery producing this blonde beer called 506 Currahee, which is the battle shout of the 506. Well, I was donated 2 crates of this beer to come on to the next excavation, which was due to be this summer, but sadly, hopefully, we'll be able to get it done in the spring. So my shed has currently still got 2 crates of this beer. I shall bring it on to the next excavation. It provides extra morale to a proper field project. If you're interested in the context of this, it is still available. The excavation was filmed, as I said, for Digging for Britain. You can still pick it up on iPlayer on BBC, where it forms part of their World War II special. I think it's only available till mid-December. So if you're keen on following up archaeological stories of the Second World War on the internet during your lockdown, then I'd recommend this program. It does have our Aldbourne material on, with some lovely imagery of the fieldwork that went on, and some interviews with some of the dig team members. And it is also available on the Historic Environment Record in Chippenham if you're still keen. So this is the entry for our particular excavation of the sports pitches at Aldbourne. And furthermore, the excavation report is written up and you can download it if you go onto a website called Breaking Ground Heritage, which is the charity run by an ex-Royal Marine called Dickie Bennett, who puts together a lot of the logistics and support for the program. If you go onto Breaking Ground Heritage and look in the publications, you can find the excavation report of our Band of Brothers program, combined with our tank dig over in France, our excavation of prisoners from the Solent, and all other manner of weird and wonderful excavations across the country. And you can pick up a lot more detail there. A lot of stuff on Barracks too, the Saxon work in Wiltshire. And that is it. I've got to thank the wonderful excavation team from a military perspective, the veterans that did so much. Harvey Mills for his photography, the superb support we've had from the volunteer archaeologists, people like Carlos and Janine, who I know are listening in, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart for the work they put in over the years. But I think we can't leave this without saying thank you to the people of Aldbourne, both in the Second World War, where they were clearly incredibly hospitable to the American service personnel before they embarked for D-Day, and also for the Bulge campaign and further on into Ardennes, and also today, because without them this project really wouldn't have succeeded. They were such a friendly bunch, helpful in every single way, and really made us feel at home. So it really was the best of communities. So thank you very much for letting me share that with you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Richard. That was really, really lovely. Thank you. David, do we have any questions on the Q&A?
Not yet, but I suspect they'll start coming in. I think people have just been listening. Apart from wondering if the stash of beer is still in your shed and we may need to go and investigate.
Do you know what? I've not had a drink in a whole year. I'm genuinely, I haven't. So this is probably the best year for that beer to be in my shed, because it is still there. There's a lot of it.
You might want to check the best of 4 date.
Well, I was thinking that I'm not going to be able to get through it before Christmas. Well, maybe I will sort that out. But yes, it is still there. Promise.
Okay. A question from me while we're waiting for others. You were talking just before we started, so I think some people have missed it, about plans for next year.
Yeah. Now the ideal for the Aldbourne side of things, and this is just I've been thinking about in the last couple of days. Really, we had hoped to come back this spring. What I'd really like to do is to go back to Aldbourne, I think in probably May, because there's an American tour group on a Battle of Britain Band of Brothers tour that'll be over, and it'd be a nice thing to coincide. It'd be a good thing if we get another of the huts further to the west examined, because I think there may be more. There's certainly more field work, and there's more work in the wider landscape as well, I think, Dan, to to consider. It'd be nice to look at the parachute school at some point. This forms part of the Operation Nightingale program I'm hoping to do in Wiltshire next year. Other elements would be there's a 6th century site I want to look at, Salisbury Plain, and then we want to rebuild a house, a Bronze Age house at a place called Butser Ancient Farm. We excavated at Dunchill on Salisbury Plain this year, and the chance of getting some of the veterans to rebuild a Bronze Age house, I think, would be a nice challenge. But from a Band of Brothers point of view, if we can do another week in the sun in May, that would be wonderful. I would say as well that the way that the archives work, the finds are still from a curation point of view, Wiltshire Museum, and David, you've kindly long-term permanent loan or whatever you call it to the Aldbourne Museum. So Aldbourne Museum does have the collection of all the finds. There's a display that has finds that have been made there in the past from previous bits of fieldwork, and I know there's been various surveys that have gone there in the past, but you can go and visit the Aldbourne Museum as and when it's open. And see our finds from the excavation, and it's got a really good display, not simply of the Band of Brothers thing, which is very significant, but also of the wonderful bells that Aldbourne's very famous for. And if you're into Doctor Who, you've got to go to Aldbourne as well, because it's got some great weird and wonderful Doctor Who stuff as well. And I know lots of people were very keen on setting the bin off every time because they would shout "exterminate" at them. It's very curious, but it's a great place to go.
And the pub isn't bad either.
Both pubs, yeah, it depends which one you want to go to, the offices or the other ranks. Both of them fabulous, really lovely.
Okay, question from Carlos and Janine. They echo the thanks from the people of Aldbourne. The vets really enjoyed their hospitality. Now the question, are there any areas in the current geophysics results that we don't know what they represent and that you might want to investigate?
Yeah, I think there's...
What about excavating one of the tent bases?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's plenty of areas, I think, is the honest answer, and I think you know that, that we'd be very keen on having a look at. We've got one curiosity that I think, Dan, we were talking about possibly getting some geophysics done closer towards the church to see where another area where they live. But
yeah, it's round by where the stables are. There's it looks like in the fields just behind it there were also a number of Nissen huts associated with that. So the camp may well have been split into 2 parts. We think we can identify a couple of the Nissen huts from aerial photographs, and there is a fields still open, not built upon. So it would be nice to see. It'd be good to see if we can pick it up.
That'd be a good thing to do. But from the survey that already exists, I think there another huts to the further south would be quite good. Along the halfway line, there's some interesting noises. I think we thought there might be some sort of generator or even pump house components, sewage. I don't want to hit the sewage works. I really don't want to hit that. That's one thing you'll find stuff in it, but I don't want to do it.
The sewage works is probably not the best thing. The middle buildings in the middle looks like communal buildings are probably shower blocks or ablutions or something. But yeah, certainly. I mean, Carlos is talking about the tent bases. I've got a bad feeling that they're covered over. But it would be interesting, we could see. But they're probably concrete bases where they used to. So they're basically all-weather tents. So you put the tent on a concrete base rather than pitching it in the grass. So at least you'd keep the sort of the weather off the floor and stuff.
I see Andy's just said leave it as anomalies. I think he's quite right. If it's a sewage place, leave it as anomaly. I think
absolutely.
You're quite right. I think the ideal, and everyone talked about being the El Dorado of easy company, would be to find the camp dump. That'd be a wonderful thing to find. But we've had so many stories we've been chasing that the various camp dumps were in various locations, either built over or just ploughed away or lost. I don't know. If we come across it, then fantastic. But I think we've got more obvious targets to go for.
Yeah, we had quite a few people in the houses just next door said that the dump was in their garden, but I think it was a ploy of getting us to dig their garden for them. So
they're not foolish in Aldbourne, are they? They're not foolish. No. And I think if we did find that the camp dump, then John's museum would be absolutely inundated with rusty stuff he'd have to look after. But we shall see. There's plenty to do there. It's a very good story, and it's nice to think that something that's not even 100 years old still has its mysteries.
Yeah, I think, sorry, David, I was going to say the other is it's not just Aldbourne as well. There is the other part of the the camp from the 101st was at Ramsbury.
Ramsbury, yeah, and we've done some geophysics there.
Yeah.
Not quite as revealing, although I think you could see still some components left on the surface of the field. There were bits of concrete and bits of brick that were still showing. So strangely, the geophysics wasn't quite as clear as the Aldbourne results. But I think there's a lot of potential there. The air photographic work was very good there, and we have an amenable landowner. So we could do something there. I'm just keen to explore Aldbourne as much as we can. We've got all the logistics and the shower block, the local showers that we can use. But yes, there's so much to, and the parachute school. I think the parachute school would be fascinating because it still stands.
That'd be lovely.
Got a question from Sarah and Mike. Great talk, thank you. Were the huts British or US design and or construction?
British, I think we can say, can't we, Dan? That the hut camp was up there in the early part of 1943. I mean, you've done quite a bit of research recently on it, haven't you? I mean, it's early 1943, used by British units, and the Americans then took it on.
Yeah, so, probably even earlier, 41, 42, and you can actually see, and we've Joe Hutchinson from Aldbourne found some archive of requisitioning information from the rectory just nearby, and the British Army actually requisitioned some of the house, some of the buildings, then actually some of the land, and it goes from a sequence probably about 40 to 43. But we do know that the last bit was actually, they did it deliberately knowing that the Americans are coming in because they extended the camp. So everything there is British.
It's great because I think these Q&A, this is a wonderful system, because John said that on the Q&A that he thought that it may be on the other side of the road that there were Quonset huts potentially with tar paper, and Joe said, was it the Worcesters that used it to start with? I don't know. There's all sorts of, well, I said, less than 100 years, there are all these different tales about it all. It's fascinating.
Yeah, John's it's an interesting point, that, because the British are the Nissen huts, the Americans are the Quonset, but what would be interesting, and actually that might be something we could look at, is whether they were building before the Americans came, but whether they actually built some American style huts to accommodate deliberately those American troops. That's an interesting point from John.
I'd like to try and trace to see if there's any bits of that glider crate left as well. Right next to the sergeant's hut, you got that what looks like a shipping container, and see if there's any little even fixtures and fittings from a Second World War Waco, I presume it would be, glider crate. That'd be an interesting thing. There can't be many of those left, I would have thought.
We know someone who's got one.
Yeah, very niche, isn't it? Very niche.
It is niche.
There's a lovely memory from Peter, who says when he was 4 years of age, he stood with his grandfather in the yard at his farm and watched aircraft forming up, filling the sky with stacks of aircraft all circling. My grandfather said, there's something big on today, my boy. So
and that was D-Day, was it?
June,
wow. Isn't that incredible?
Like
Incredible, yeah. What a thing to see.
We've and on the traces, I think I sent you, there was a shepherd's hut up for auction recently that had some graffiti in from guys on the Easy Company. Went for I think it went something like £20,000 it sold for, which is a shame.
One of the guys that took part in our project actually owns an American helmet that went over with Easy Company on the morning of D-Day. He was shot by a sniper, this American soldier, but survived. It was just dented, but he's got this relic looking helmet which was just left behind in his I think it was his aunt's garden, with the ace of spades on the side of it, and he knows exactly which soldier used it, who got through the Second World War, and you think that thing is probably worth an absolute fortune if you were into selling these sorts of things. But yeah, the story of this particular item, that's Roger that owns that. That's quite a sensational thing.
And someone's asked, why did you pick Carwood Lipton over any of the others?
Just because he's the one at the front of that photograph. So you got the photograph that I can't remember. I think it was in was it in Neil Stevens' book, Gathering of Eagles? I think it was, with all the individual soldiers in front of the, so we got that photograph, and we were locating ourselves in the landscape on the football pitch, and you could see that hill with the trees, so we knew precisely where we were. And Neil's got an annotated picture that one of the guys from Easy Company has written down who each individual soldier was, and scribbled by the sergeant at the front, oh, that's Carwood Lipton. So we thought, well, we're looking for that particular building, which is the sergeant's building. We knew that from that scribbled note, and there's this photograph of Carwood Lipton in front of it, so it just seemed to be the person to tie it all onto would it seemed the obvious one to tie it onto Lipton because he's in the photograph and we know that was his building. So it just seemed to be the obvious one. There's another one for the other building I want to find to the west, which is it's just Other Ranks. I think it's still Easy Company, Other Ranks. But there's a lovely photograph of some guy posing on a push bike in front of it. We don't know who he is, but that would be the individual to trace for that one, I think, Dan. If we get someone to find out who he is.
Really nice, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and Melanie Pomeroy-Kellinger says, how much useful info has there been in the Wiltshire and Swindon archives?
That's a good question, and I know that your HER officer Mel Tom has been really keen on, and so you, of augmenting the 20th century records. I don't think there's a huge amount in there. I mean, the HER, as I showed later on in the talk, has got the spot on it. I'm not sure whether it's got the work done by Oxford Archaeology, I think, did a survey along with a metal detecting piece of work that took place.
I think what Melanie will have been talking about is essentially what was the county record office, now
the archive.
Oh, okay, yeah,
the paper archives.
Paper archives. Good question.
Joe and we've looked at some of those. The best source of information we found have been the local parish records. And that's why and they've got all the stores of sort of, I can't remember, it's the Rural Council of, Joe will remember now, Rural Council of Ramsbury, Aldbourne, something like that. And in those records, it's like a diary of their sort of monthly meetings. And in that is when we first found the mention that the Americans were in Aldbourne, because there was something about talking about giving money to basically requisition the sports field. So certain bits of information that's quite useful. So it's all the sort of the stuff going around it, and lots of information. And Joe, certainly she's found a lot of records of their own Aldbourne records and information talking about people not being able to use the village hall because the British Army are in there and things like that. So it's just that sort of background. But yeah.
Andy Payne has asked, do we know what airfield Easy Company flew from on D-Day?
It was a Pottery, wasn't it? I think it was. Which is down towards Exeter. Yeah, I think it was a Pottery down at Exeter.
And Alison's asked if there's a map showing all the US air bases in Wiltshire prior to D-Day.
Oh, I can't think of one. Oh, there we go. Yeah, no, so it's from College. Yeah, practice jumps from did the practicing from Ramsbury. I can't think of American. I mean, Roger would be the person to think about, wouldn't he?
Roger Day, yeah. He's got a website called Ramsbury War that might have some. I said on the chat to Alison that the Americans, they took over. So they took over Ramsbury, they took over Membry, which is down the road as well. I can't think off the top of my head which other ones they did, because the Americans, most of them they took over were the bombing airfields down sort of east
on the east coast for the 8th Air Force for that was the main side of things, wasn't it? Or the
really this side of things would have been for D-Day and the preparations, I suppose.
Yeah. Sorry, Melinda's added that he used Rawton, okay.
And all round Salisbury Plain, they were based all over the place because they were combining the parachutists with the armoured units that were based around Warminster and Tidworth and things like that. There's some lovely pictures of Eisenhower reviewing troops on Salisbury Plain, which are mainly the Sherman tank units. So yeah, lots of really nice links.
And on the chat, Katie Whitaker says there's county by county books of all the airfields. You can probably pick out the USAF ones in the Wiltshire book.
Yeah, that's true. And we've got copies of those at the Historic England Library, which is open to the public when we have COVID restrictions listed. So,
Alison said there's one near Westbury. Jenny Pollard has asked, do you believe the tree graffiti was made by Carwood?
I'm leaving this to you, Dan.
No, you're the believer, Richard.
Definitely. No. They're very difficult to trace, I think. I mean, I've found some good Australian ones from the First World War on Salisbury Plain, which are very, very helpful because every single attestation paper is online, so you definitely can trace those ones because they're very helpful. Give you their initials, where they're from, and which particular unit, and and you're able to trace that pretty easily because they're quite a small, relatively small army. And so I think we've traced 3 Australians from the First War, which is great. This one, I mean, CL USA. There's quite a few CLs, I'd imagine, from USA. I don't know. It'd be lovely if it was. Dan, what do you think? Go on.
I'd like to believe.
What about Tony G? Tony G. There can't be many Tony Gs, can there?
I have a feeling Tony G was possibly a little bit early in the day. I don't know.
You're an absolute spoilsport. You are.
Oh no, don't.
I want to say hours. Definitely these leading members of Easy Company. It's impossible to say, I think, but CL. I mean, I think it's just in some ways nice just to have the possibility.
Shall we agree that it was? And then no one else can say no.
We'll agree that it's certainly a possibility. Let's go for that.
Ken is with you on that.
Yeah, good.
Excellent. No, I've spent quite a bit of time trying to find them. It is difficult because for the Americans you can trace them. It's quite good, but you do need a name and a place. So a lot of them write sort of Dave Harrington, Memphis or something.
Yeah.
That helps. But when you've got just a name, it's just a nightmare. There's thousands, or I can't even think how many was it. 1 million troops American. It's not that many, was it? It was a huge amount over here. And even odd names, you've still got 20, 30 of them. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like a Smith. It's just really, really difficult to find and trace them down. But yeah, let's believe.
Okay, that's it for the questions. Unless there's anyone else.
No. Perfect.
That's it.
Lovely.
Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's really
pleasure.
good.
Thank you.
Again, we haven't quite worked out the applause thing, have you, David?
No,
Did you?
Failed again.
Oh, but there is thank you very much. We'll sort that out.
Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. So thank you.
Really, I'd just like to say, to end up, to say thank you very much to Richard tonight, but to all our speakers for the last 3 weeks. Oh, there is one raised hand, David.
Oh, I didn't spot that.
Oh, and you want to try that one? Just as a last raised hand. We've only had a few of these the last few weeks.
I can't see who it is.
Cat's been desperate to get in. There we are. Hello. I'm not responding to that, Melanie.
Can you work it out, David?
Well,
no, it's a Q&A now.
Tim Dutch is saying
that's
another thank you. Jenny Pollard. Oh no, I think we'll not worry about that.
Yeah, what's the cat's name?
That is Mary.
Oh,
Mary.
Sorry,
sister of Pippin.
Have you seen? Oh, maybe it's gone. The raised hand, or can you see it, David?
No, I can't see it.
No,
I should have shown that cat. It's raising way more questions. I'm sorry about that.
The person who raised a hand, I'm very sorry. I can't find it either. Right, in that case, let's call it a night. Thank you very much, Richard. Again, thank you very much to all the speakers for the last few weeks. Thank you very much for everyone who's attended one or all or some of these talks. It's been a really interesting experience. I would like to say we hopefully we won't have a whole conference again online, because we'll all be back health and sound and in person, celebrating, eating buffet and having a pint in the Bear after. But it would be really nice to maybe see if we could do some more of these sort of online talks and things. I think it's a really a different experience, and something that we could maybe think about doing some more of, David.
Yeah, well, we do have a whole program.
Of course,
few talks lined up and more to come.
Yeah,
sort of as we get dates confirmed. So we're carrying on with online talks until we don't need to anymore. But even then, because there are people who sort of we know are joining from all over the place, then we'll try and do both real life and run them online as well, so more people can take part.
Fantastic.
But can I just add my thanks also to all the speakers, to Karen, who behind the scenes makes everything work, and we keep keeping an eye on things just to make sure we're behaving ourselves. And she's the one that sort of emailed the links out and looked after all the bookings. And a very big thank you to you, Dan, for hosting it. It's been great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later.
See you next time.
Let's hope no snow next time either, David.
pestilence, snow.
I know.
Next?
Which
What
apocalypse member is turning up next time?
Thanks ever so much, Richard.
Okay, good to see you.
Good night.